Hey guys, welcome back to Andy's Dinosaur Reviews, and today we are back with what could be the laziest figure that Playmates has put out for this year, at least as far as these Godzilla x Kong figures go, because we have the Godzilla with Heat Ray, and it looks to honestly be almost the exact same figure that they had released last time for the Godzilla vs. Kong film, and I actually do have the original figure here. We are going to compare them, but honestly, it looks like it is very close to the same thing, maybe just repainted and possibly with a new tail compared to the original release. So, you know, take that as you will. I think it's not very good on the part of Playmates to do something like that. And yes, I get it's going to look the same considering it is, you know, the same type of Godzilla. Or at least I would imagine from the first part of the film, it's probably going to be the same Godzilla that we had seen before it evolves. But they could have just given us somewhat of a different figure as far as the sculpt goes and not just reuse the same sculpt entirely. It's, again, not the end of the world because it is what it is, but it's just something that kind of bothers me. I feel like they should have put forth at least a little bit more effort. And as a whole, I feel like this toy line has been a little lackluster. There's been some pretty cool stuff, but there hasn't really been anything that has stood out as amazing so far to me. Just some pretty cool stuff. But you can see, again, we've got a nice image of Godzilla and Kong down here, as well as, again, Godzilla with the Heat Ray, the title of the new film, and the figure itself. And then when we turn it around and take a look at the back, you can see, again, we've got Godzilla with the Heat Ray, and then down here showing off all of the other figures that are in this line. Regardless, I'm pretty interested to take a look at this and compare it with the older version, so let's pop it out of the box and do just that. So here is our Atomic Breath variant of Godzilla, and you know, it really does look pretty much just like the older release, just the tail to me looks a little different, and of course the coloration, so it's a slight repaint, slight retooled figure, it seems, but again, it doesn't look terrible by any means, but it also doesn't look great. Kind of has that same similar, almost muted look to the skin texture that we see on, you know, the evolved version of Godzilla, but maybe a little bit better, actually. Like, some areas have that kind of muted look, and some areas look a little better, I think, than the evolved version does. But either way, it's not the worst thing in the world, that's for sure, so let's jump to a closer look, and we'll check it out from there. So starting up here at the head sculpt of the Godzilla, you can see we have a nice black tone for the majority of the body. You can see we have a blue eye with a black pupil, and the eye doesn't look terrible, but it clearly isn't painted perfectly. Like, the shape of it looks a little weird, but that one actually doesn't have much in the way of a pupil. But the eye is still, again, pretty big, not quite as large as you seem to see on the evolved version, but still fairly large regardless. We do have an articulated jaw. You can see we have a pink for the inside of the mouth on the tongue area, and then some white for the teeth, and the teeth they're okay when it comes to the paintwork, but still a little sloppy. The actual sculpting of the teeth, though, doesn't really look that great. Like, you almost can't even make out teeth at all. It's just kind of a line of material and white paint that they've put on the inside of the mouth. So not really the best, that's for sure, but also, again, not terrible. You can see the jaw does seem to work at least pretty decently, though. I don't know if we have an articulated neck. Yeah, I mean, kind of. For some reason, the necks of these figures never articulate well. They just kind of move slightly and then start to kind of fall back into place. But you can see that the detailing in the head here actually looks okay, I think. Doesn't look as bad as the evolved version. It's not great, but it's not quite as bad as the evolved version. And then, obviously, this is a rubber, because you can definitely see the difference in quality between there to the body. The body is a plastic, the head is kind of like a rubberish material, and then once you reach the body, you can see that the detailing becomes muted even more so than we see on the face and the head and neck area. It doesn't look bad up here, it really doesn't. It looks fairly decent, but once you come down here, you can definitely see, again, the muted look. But that means that as you lead out into the arms, we again return to that kind of rubbery material. We have some fairly decent looking sculpt and detail out there on the arm. no nail paint, it looks like. It's just the same tone of color as the body itself is. But as you move down, it's weird because you can see that the detail does look a little muted. Like in comparison to this area, it's absolutely muted here, but not that bad. It looks okay. But then when you get down here into the tail, something happens, and I don't know what it is, but obviously the detail gets extraordinarily muted, like compared to everywhere else. If you look at it from afar, you can see the detail doesn't look terrible there, but such a huge difference between here to there when it comes to the way that the actual fine detail looks. Moving into the legs, again, the legs are that same kind of hard plastic that we have for the body, and I don't think the detail looks terrible moving down the legs. I think it looks okay. Again, not quite as crisp or vibrant as you would see up here in like the rubbery areas, but still not bad. And I was actually incorrect. The nails do have paintwork on it, but I couldn't really tell because they didn't paint them out well. Like for the majority of the nail that's there, they've only really painted the tips of the nails, which is pretty strange. But as you move down, you can see the foot sculpt looks kind of okay. If my camera would focus on it, there we go. You can see it looks okay. The nails are painted, and they're not painted perfectly. You can see the paint doesn't match up perfectly over there, but they are painted. And again, as you lead out into the tail, we transition back to kind of like that rubbery sort of material. So the detail, I think, pops a little nicer moving out onto the tail than you see up here. And then, of course, we have the bluish tone moving down along the back, all the way down into the tail. It tapers off right about here, but you can see it looks pretty good. And one thing about this figure is it doesn't have any of those translucent spines or anything. So the blue actually is pretty consistent the entire way through, which I think does help to make the figure look a bit nicer. You also have a darkening toward the tips of the spines as well as you move down through the course of the back. Again, the spines look okay. They don't look super highly detailed, a little muted when it comes to the detail, but they also don't look terrible. The first few spines don't have any of the bluish paint on it, though, for some reason. But again, the figure does look fairly decent. I would say it probably looks a little better than the evolved versions have. And you also have the battle damage on the underside of the chest here, and you can see we've basically got like a rip of the skin of Godzilla with some reddish tones or pinkish tones on the inside of the chest right there. And then, of course, you have the battle wound cover, so it's almost like old school Kenner when it comes to this, and I do like that. I think that is pretty fun. It's a little hard sometimes to get the battle damage wound covers off at times, if I remember correctly from the older releases of these figures. But as far as articulation goes, again, we saw the jaw, we saw the neck. We do have arm articulation, but only up and down. It doesn't like come out away from the body or anything. Leg articulation, forward and back. It's about as high up as it goes. It's about as far down as it goes. You do have ankle swivels, which just cracked because that's the first time I've done that. And then you also have the tail articulation, which can swivel and go up and down, kind of left and right, so you have a little bit of mobility there. Not really the greatest articulation, but for Godzilla, I mean, you can't really expect too much more when it comes to a regular standard kind of Godzilla toy. And then we do have the atomic breath, and you can see the atomic breath is pretty cool, even though it's not really the greatest thing in the world when it comes to the sculpt. It's just basically coming out with a straight line, kind of getting larger as it goes toward the tip, and also has a nice, fairly translucent sort of a look. Like up here, yeah, I guess you can see through it there. You can see my finger on the other side, but it's a very dark blue up here, kind of lightens to a lighter blue the closer you get to the mouth of Godzilla. But it looks pretty cool, and definitely a decent atomic breath. I'm excited to see it in the mouth of Godzilla to see how it looks. I think the other ones for the evolved Godzilla looked a little better, even if it did look kind of like jelly leaking out of its mouth, but this one doesn't look bad either. And there is our Godzilla now with the wound cover on and the atomic breath coming out, and you can see it does look pretty cool. I will give Playmates that. It's definitely not a bad figure, and it's probably better than most of the evolved Godzillas that are out. It is just unfortunate that it's almost the exact same figure we had last year. But as far as a size goes, or not last year, but for the last film, I mean, but as far as the size goes, height-wise, you were looking at a little over 6 inches, maybe heading towards 6 1/4, but not quite there, or about 15.5 centimeters. And then for a length from the tip of the tail We're not going to go to the tip of the atomic breath, just to the snout, about 9 3/4 inches, or just shy of 25 centimeters. For a size comparison, there is Mr. Papo T-Rex, the Attack Pack Colovosaurus, Robert Muldoon, and the Collect a Human Being next to our Godzilla. And as you can see here, it is exactly the size you would expect it to be. If you are familiar with the Godzilla versus Kong line at all, you are definitely going to know what the Godzilla X Kong version of this figure is size-wise. And then for a comparison with the evolved version of Godzilla, you can see again that they are pretty much the same size. Maybe the evolved version is a hair taller, but they're pretty close to the same size overall. Now here is the comparison that I find most interesting, because this is basically the battle damage release from Godzilla vs. Kong compared to the atomic breath Godzilla from Godzilla X Kong. And you can see, looking at the two, the sculpt is extremely similar. There are just a few minor differences, but one area that really gives the sculpt away when it comes to being the same sculpt is, as you move down, you can see that the color is a little darker on this one, but you'll see that, again, somewhat muted look. You can also see the spines are exactly the same, just they're translucent on the older version, not translucent on the newer version. But when you move down, what do you see here? You see this sort of decent looking detail, then all of a sudden it's extremely muted here in the tail. Same thing for this one, so it means that the primary body here used is definitely the same as the older one. Also, the battle damage here, which you can see in the front, is exactly the same. It's shaped the same. Everything as far as that goes is the same. So the figure almost is entirely the same figure, just kind of a repaint, and then of course we don't have translucent spines. The tails though are different, because if you actually look at the tails of the figure, obviously you can see that the tails are very much so differently positioned. Overall, the older one has the tail kind of down flat on the ground. The newer one has the tail up off of the ground. The only other difference that I personally have found are the legs. The legs are actually a little different, which I didn't realize at first, but you can see that the leg is straightened out here, whereas the elongated leg on this one that's kind of taking a step forward is still bent a little bit. And then when we look at the other side, these legs look like they could be the same for the most part, just kind of flip-flopped when they were making the figure, because now the kind of crouched leg is on the left side of the newer one. It was on the right side of the older one. But overall, they're very, very similar, and obviously some parts were reused for this figure. So it's not quite as lazy as I was thinking at first. I thought it was almost an entire, the same figure overall, but they did do at least some differences. And I guess if the Godzilla doesn't differ much, from the older visual of it, why go ahead and resculpt the figure entirely? I guess you could reuse the parts that you have previously, because it was already, I guess, good enough for the first toy line. The atomic breaths are definitely different as well. You can obviously see shape and color-wise, they are quite different overall. So this brand new Godzilla X Kong, the New Empire Atomic Breath Godzilla from Playmates is okay, but I don't think this is going to be one of the, favorites from the line, although there aren't really all that many figures that I would think could be, really, really high up on people's fan favorites list, because as a whole, I feel like this line has kind of been a letdown. Not many of the figures have been all that great, and this one is okay, as I said, because, it's just basically like the same figure we had a few years back with a few minor adjustments and a repaint, and that's not really that great. And in fact, I actually think the atomic breath is worse on this one than the older one. But that said, for being a Godzilla, again, for the Godzilla that it's meant to represent, it's not bad. It's just there could be improvements made, like the detailing being fairly muted through the course of the body is definitely a downside, and the paintwork is pretty sloppy, and that's been very consistent through most of this line. When you look at the nails, they didn't really paint the nails out that well. Some nails only have a quick glance over the tip, and that's it. And the eyes as well, even though they're not terrible, they're definitely not placed perfectly, and they're not the correct size. So Overall, the paintwork isn't really the best, but that's been pretty consistent through every single Godzilla that they have released for this new line. That said, I am still a fan of the battle damage wound that they have for the figure. Again, it, screams classic Kenner, so I always enjoy that sort of thing. Even though it is a little hard at times to get back off of the Godzilla, it is still pretty fun, and the articulation is decent on it. It works pretty smoothly. It's not revolutionary. It's kind of, your standard as to what you would expect, but it's not that bad, but it does work pretty smoothly. So overall, it's definitely not a figure that I say you absolutely need to run out and grab, and if you did collect the first Godzilla vs. Kong line of figures, I really don't even think you need to grab this figure if you're not a completist. If you don't want everything that they release in your collection, it's definitely an easy pass because it's almost the same figure we had last time. So if you are interested though, you can head to your local Walmart or your local Target, and it should hopefully be there. I will check to see if there is a link online somewhere to link you to grab it from there as well. And of course, like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next review. Thanks for watching.